So this first lesson is a review of integers work from previous courses. And when we hear the word integers, we should think about whole numbers, so no fractions or decimals, but they may be negative. And usually when we think about integers, we tend to think about negative numbers. But integers also includes positive numbers, but always whole values. And so first, addition and subtraction with integers. If I have 12 plus negative 8, that means I have 12 whole, 12 positives, and I'm adding negative 8, which means when you're adding a negative, that's the same as just taking away. So this is the same as just subtracting 8. So this is equivalent to just 12 take away 8. These mean the exact same thing. Adding negative 8 is the same as subtracting 8, so it just equals 4. And in general, anytime you're adding a negative, I'd recommend just think of it as subtracting. Instead of thinking of adding negative 8, I think you're better off just thinking of it as subtracting 8. They mean the same thing, but it's hard to argue that 12 take away 8 doesn't look simpler than 12 plus negative 8. What about when you're subtracting a negative? This means we're starting at 12, and we're taking away a negative. Now, when we're taking away a whole, we get smaller, but we're taking away a negative. Taking away a negative is actually the same as adding. So like I said, if we were just subtracting positive 8, it's pretty clear this would be 4. But I'm not taking away positive 8, I'm subtracting a negative, which again is an abstract idea, but it kind of follows that if subtracting 8 makes it smaller, then subtracting negative 8 should make it larger. And this is equivalent to 12 plus 8, which is a lot easier to think about, which is 20. And so anytime you're subtracting a negative, I would always think of it as just adding. It's a lot simpler. But they mean, in the end, these are equivalent. 12 take away negative 8 is equivalent to just 12 plus 8. And, wrong way. Let's look at this next pair. Look at these one at a time. What about negative 12 plus negative 8? Well, I've already mentioned that adding a negative is the same as just subtracting. So this is equivalent to negative 12 take away 8. So what is that? Well, I'm at negative 12, and I'm losing more. I'm losing 8 more. Again, adding 8 negatives is the same as taking away 8. So I'm already in the negatives. I have negative 12 is where I'm starting, and I'm losing 8 more. So I'm even more into the negatives. So that brings me to negative 20. So right here, I'm subtracting a negative. So like I mentioned before, I would right away rethink of this as negative 12 plus 8. Negative 12 minus negative 8 is equivalent to negative 12 plus 8. So now, what does this equal? Well, I'm at negative 12, but I'm getting larger. I'm getting closer towards 0. I'm counting up 8 from negative 12. That's it. I'm still in the negatives, because I started at negative 12, but I'm closer to 0, so I'm at negative 4. All right, last two in reviewing addition and subtraction. Just negative 12 plus 8. Well, notice negative 12 plus 8 is, in the end, the exact same thing we did here. And so for the exact same reason that negative 12 plus 8 up here is negative 4, this is negative 4. The question looked different, but it was equivalent. And similarly as well, this last one, negative 12 minus 8, if you look at that, is equivalent to what we did right here, which means the answer should be the equivalent answer we had right here, so negative 20. And so in general, if you look at what's highlighted in yellow, subtracting a negative, I would always think of it as just subtracting a positive. And subtracting, I said that wrong, sorry. Adding a negative, I would always think as just subtracting. And subtracting a negative, I'd always think as just adding. Ideally, this is all familiar. This is all just meant to be a review. Important ideas that are easy to make mistakes with. I mean, again, subtracting a negative is an abstract idea, but you've definitely learned about this before, so hopefully this sounds familiar. Multiplication. Well, first of all, these four statements you see at the top, in the top row, they're all equivalent. Negative 8 times 5, like that, means the same thing as this. This also means negative 8 times 5. And in general, anytime you don't see a operation between a number and something else, it always means multiplication, always. And so this also means negative 8 times 5. And this little dot, it's not a decimal. I know it's not a decimal because it's not at the bottom. And again, it's a small detail, but if it looked like this, now that's negative 8.5. But that's not how it looked. The dot was right there. And I appreciate it looks similar, but these all are 4 different ways of saying the same thing. Negative 8 times 5. And a negative times a positive is always a negative, so all of these equal negative 40. They're all the same thing. 4 different ways of saying the same thing. In general, we move away from using the time symbol already. We're starting to move away from it just because sometimes it looks like the variable x if we're working with some algebra. So with that said, if I look at these three examples here, negative 8 times negative 5, a negative times a negative is a positive. So this is the same as positive 40. 5 times negative 11, 5 times 11 is 55, but there's a negative there, so it's negative 55. Again, a positive times a negative is always a negative. The order doesn't matter. And for this last one, I have three factors, we call them, being multiplied to each other. First, negative 3 times negative 3, that's positive 9. So I have positive 9 times negative 3. Well, 9 times 3 is 27, but in positive times a negative is a negative. And so lastly, division. As with the last set, the top row are all equivalent. Everything you see here is equivalent to one another. Some may look simpler to you, but they all mean the same thing. They all are the same as negative 24 divided by 3. And we don't lose sight that that division symbol looks like a fraction. I mean, it's kind of implying a numerator and a denominator there. In this case, you can think of negative 24 as your numerator, 3 as your denominator. So these all equal the same thing. And so again, negative 24, negative 24, negative 24. The last one, the negative is in the denominator, but it doesn't matter. Just like when you're multiplying, if you are dividing with a positive and a negative, the answer is always negative. So all of these equal negative 8. But the most important thing is realizing these are all equivalent. And so even if you look at the fraction, again, or the three fractions, they all essentially mean 24 divided by 3 with a negative somewhere. And 24 divided by 3 is 8. There's only one negative, so they all equal negative 8. And so to finish off, these all involve division. So negative 30 over negative 2, which is the same as negative 30 divided by negative 2. Well, 30 divided by 2 is 15. And negative divided by negative is a positive. Answer is just 15. Negative 32 over 4, equivalent to negative 32 divided by 4. Well, 32 divided by 4 is 8. A negative divided by a positive is a negative. And lastly, it'll take me 2 steps. First, negative 4 times negative 4, which is positive 16. But that's still being divided by negative 2. So again, 16 divided by 2 is 8. A positive divided by a negative is a negative. So hopefully this all sounds familiar. Chances are some things feel more familiar than others, but hopefully none of this actually feels new.